One question, 5 words, and Steve Harvey stopped mid-laugh, dropped his cards, and did something no one watching Family Feud ever expected to see. The studio went silent. 300 people held their breath, because what 14-year-old Marcus Thompson just said wasn't just an answer on a game show board. It was a confession that would expose the hidden battle Steve Harvey had been fighting in silence for years. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not on national television, not in front of millions. But sometimes truth doesn't wait for permission. Let me take you back to that Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta when a routine Family Feud taping became something nobody in that studio would ever forget. The Thompson family from Detroit had made it to the fast money round. They needed 107 points to win $20,000 money that could change everything for a family barely holding on. Marcus stood at the podium wearing his father's old button-down shirt, nervous but determined. Steve Harvey was in his element. Signature suit, pressed perfectly, energy high, working the crowd with that natural charisma that had made him America's favorite game show host. He'd done this thousands of times before. Ask the questions, get the laughs, celebrate the wins. But something about Marcus caught his attention. The way the kid gripped that podium, the intensity in his eyes. Steve had seen plenty of nervous contestants, but this felt different. "All right, Marcus, you ready, young man?" Steve flashed that $1,000,000 smile. "Let's win this money for your family." The first 4 questions went smooth. Standard answers, quick responses. The family was climbing toward that winning number. Then came the 5th question, the one that would change everything. "Name something," Steve began, his voice confident, "that helps you get through the hardest times in life." It should have been simple. Family, friends, music. Any of those would have scored points. Marcus opened his mouth, hesitated, then spoke. "Talking to God when nobody else understands." 5 words that hit the studio like a thunderclap. Steve's smile didn't just fade, it shattered. His hand, which had been holding the answer card with practiced ease, trembled. For 3 full seconds, America's most confident game show host stood frozen, staring at this teenager like he'd just read his diary. The audience noticed immediately. Something was wrong. Or maybe something was too right. "Say that again, son." Steve's voice cracked slightly. Not the practiced crack of a comedian setting up a punchline. The real kind. The vulnerable kind. Marcus, confused by the reaction, repeated it. "Talking to God when nobody else understands what you're going through." The scoreboard revealed the answer: 34 points. Enough to win the $20,000. Confetti should have fallen. Music should have blasted. The family should have been jumping up and down. Instead, there was this moment, this impossible, suspended moment, where Steve Harvey just stood there, cards hanging loose in his hand, staring at Marcus like the kid had just reached into his chest and pulled out his heart. What nobody watching knew, what wouldn't make sense until much later, was that Marcus had just repeated, word for word, what Steve had whispered to God 3 nights earlier. Alone in his hotel room, on his knees. Broken, exhausted, from years of performing strength he didn't always feel. The cameras were still rolling. The producers in the booth were signaling frantically, "Move on, keep the energy up. This is supposed to be the celebration moment." Steve wasn't listening to any of them. He set down his cards carefully, deliberately, like a man putting down a weapon he'd been carrying too long. Then he walked past the cameras, past the confused production crew, straight to Marcus. "Young man," his voice was barely above a whisper, but in that silent studio, everyone heard it. "Where did you learn to say that?" Marcus looked genuinely confused. "Learn what, Mr. Harvey?" "Those words. That answer. Where did it come from?" The teenager shrugged, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "It's just what I do, I guess. When things get hard. When my mom was sick last year and we thought we'd lose her. When we almost lost our house. When everything felt like it was falling apart and I didn't know who else to talk to." Steve's jaw tightened. His eyes glistened under those bright studio lights. "So you just talk to him when nobody else gets it?" "Yeah," Marcus nodded simply. "Because he's the only one who really understands, you know?" And that's when Steve Harvey, comedian, entertainer, the man who'd made a career out of never missing a beat, broke down completely. Not a single tear rolling down his cheek for the cameras, full breakdown, shoulders shaking, hand covering his face, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep you can't fake it, can't perform it, can't control it. The audience gasped. Some people started crying themselves, not even knowing why. The Thompson family stood frozen at their podium, uncertain what was happening. And Marcus, 14-year-old Marcus from Detroit, who'd only wanted to win money for his struggling family, stood there watching one of the most famous men in America fall apart in front of him. Steve finally pulled himself together enough to speak, but his voice was raw, stripped of all polish. "Cut the cameras," he said to the production booth. "Steve, we're in the middle of—" I said, "Cut the cameras. Now." The confused director complied. The red recording lights blinked off. The studio fell into an uncertain silence. Steve pulled Marcus aside, away from the microphones, away from the family, away from the 300 watching eyes. For 2 full minutes they talked. Nobody else could hear what was said. But when they came back, both of them had tears streaming down their faces, and both of them were smiling. Steve turned to face the audience, his carefully constructed TV persona completely gone. "I need to tell y'all something," he began, his voice still shaky. "I don't usually do this. I don't talk about my personal struggles on camera. I'm supposed to be the guy who has it all together, right? The guy who makes you laugh, who keeps the energy up, who never lets you see him sweat." He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "But 3 nights ago, I was in my hotel room and I was struggling. I'm talking about really struggling, with pressure, with expectations, with feeling like I'm carrying the weight of everyone's hopes and dreams, and I can't ever show weakness because that's not what Steve Harvey does." The studio was utterly silent now. People in the audience were leaning forward, barely breathing. And I got on my knees, something I don't admit to people often enough. And I prayed. Not one of those pretty prayers. One of those desperate prayers, where you're just real with God because you're too tired to pretend anymore. Steve looked at Marcus, who was standing there with wide eyes, beginning to understand what was happening. "I said to God, I need to talk to you because nobody else understands what I'm carrying. Show me I'm not alone in this." The audience collectively realized what was happening. Gasps echoed through the studio.
And 3 days later, Steve's voice broke again.
This young man stands at that podium and says the exact same words back to me, word for word. Marcus's mother, standing at the family podium, started crying. She walked over to her son and wrapped him in a hug. Steve turned to the camera, even though it wasn't recording, and spoke directly to where the lens would be. "If you're watching this and you're struggling and you're tired of pretending you're strong all the time, I want you to know something. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to get on your knees and talk to God when nobody else understands. That's not weakness. That's the realest strength there is." He looked back at Marcus. "This young man just reminded me of that, and I needed that reminder more than he'll ever know." But here's what made that moment even more powerful. What the cameras didn't capture in that edited version that aired months later. After Steve finished speaking to the audience, he did something else that nobody expected. He called both families, the Thompsons and their competitors, the Martinez family from Houston, to center stage. "Y'all came here to compete against each other," Steve said, his voice still thick with emotion. "But I think we just learned something bigger than competition today." He looked at Marcus, then at the Martinez family's teenage daughter, Sophia, who was also standing there with tears in her eyes. "How old are you, sweetheart?" Steve asked her. 15. "Mr. Harvey," Sophia said quietly. "And did what Marcus said? Did that mean something to you too?" Sophia nodded, unable to speak at first. Then she found her voice. "My dad died 2 years ago, and there are nights when I can't sleep because I miss him so much. And the only thing that helps is doing exactly what Marcus said, talking to God when nobody else understands what it feels like to lose your father when you're only 13. Now both families were crying. The audience was openly weeping. Steve Harvey stood in the middle of it all. This man who'd built an empire on making people laugh, creating a moment of raw human connection that transcended entertainment. "You see that?" Steve said to the camera, even though it still wasn't recording. That's what we're really here for. Not the points, not the prizes, but these moments when we remember we're all carrying something. We're all struggling with something, and we're all looking for someone who understands. He turned to the production booth. Start recording again. I want this on tape. The cameras came back on. Steve addressed them directly.
I've hosted this show for years.
Thousands of episodes, tens of thousands of contestants, and I've laughed with people, celebrated with people, shared amazing moments with people. But this, he gestured to the two families standing together, to Marcus and Sophia, to the audience that had become part of something bigger than a game show. This is why God put me here. What happened next became legend among Family Feud staff members. Steve announced that both families would split the $20,000 prize money. The producers initially protested that wasn't how the game worked. It wasn't in the budget. It would set a precedent. Steve didn't care. I'll pay the other half myself if I have to, he said firmly. These families both won today, not on the scoreboard, where it actually matters. The network, recognizing the power of what had just happened, agreed. Both families went home with $10,000 each, but more importantly, they went home with something money couldn't buy. A reminder that their struggles weren't invisible, that their pain mattered, that someone understood. 6 months later, Steve did something else that surprised everyone who knew him. He started a foundation called When Nobody Else Understands, named after Marcus's 5 words. The foundation provided counseling, support groups, and resources for people struggling with depression, anxiety, grief, and the weight of expectations. The first donation came from Marcus's family, $1,000 of their $10,000 prize money. Mr. Harvey gave us more than money that day, Marcus's mother explained in an interview. He gave us permission to be honest about our struggles. We want to give that gift to other people. Sophia's family donated too. So did hundreds of people who watched the episode when it finally aired. Within a year, the foundation had raised over $2 million and helped thousands of people find the support they needed. But for Steve, the impact went deeper than any foundation or dollar amount. His assistant later revealed that Steve had been considering retiring from Family Feud before that day. He was exhausted, burned out, feeling like the constant performance was draining something essential from his soul. Marcus's 5 words changed that. They reminded Steve why he'd gotten into entertainment in the first place, not to escape from real life, but to create moments of genuine connection within it, not to make people forget their problems, but to help them feel less alone in carrying them. That kid saved my career, Steve admitted in a private moment to his wife, Marjorie. More than that, he saved me from forgetting what matters. Marcus and Steve stayed in touch, not in a publicized, PR-managed way, but genuinely. Steve would call on Marcus's birthday. Send him books he thought the kid would like. Once when Marcus was struggling with bullying at school, Steve flew to Detroit unannounced and spent an afternoon talking with him about how to handle people who don't understand you. Remember what you taught me, Steve told him. When nobody else understands, you've got somebody who always will. Don't forget that when things get hard. Marcus never did forget, and neither did the millions of people who watched that episode and recognized themselves in either Steve's hidden struggle or Marcus's honest answer. The episode became a cultural moment. Pastors referenced it in sermons. Therapists used it in counseling sessions. Teachers showed it to students as an example of vulnerability and strength coexisting. It's Steve Harvey. He kept hosting Family Feud, but something fundamental had shifted. He was still funny, still charismatic, still able to work a crowd better than almost anyone in television. But now there was a depth to his hosting that hadn't been there before. A willingness to let moments breathe, to honor the humanity of contestants, to recognize when entertainment needed to step aside for something more important. 3 years after that taping, Steve was asked in an interview what his proudest moment in television had been. They didn't mention any awards he'd won, didn't talk about ratings or viral moments or celebrity guests. A 14-year-old kid from Detroit, he said simply, who reminded me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you're not strong all the time. That's the moment I'm most proud of, not because of anything I did, but because I was smart enough to stop and listen when truth showed up. Today, Marcus is 17, planning to study psychology in college, wants to work with kids who are going through struggles similar to what he experienced. Mr. Harvey showed me that being honest about hard things can help other people, Marcus explained when asked about his career plans. If my answer on a game show could do that, imagine what a lifetime of helping people could do. Steve sent him a congratulatory message when he heard about Marcus's college plans. It said, "You're going to change lives, young man. You already started with mine." The suit jacket Steve wore that day, the one he was wearing when Marcus's answer broke him down, hangs in Steve's office now. Not in his studio dressing room where the other suits are kept, but in his private office, where he goes to think, to pray, to remember what matters. Pinned to the jacket is a small note card. On it, written in Steve's handwriting, are 5 words. Talking to God when nobody else understands. A reminder. A touchstone. A truth spoken by a teenager that changed everything. Because sometimes, that's all it takes. 5 honest words. 1 vulnerable moment. And the willingness to stop performing long enough to let truth do what it does best. Connect us, heal us, remind us we're not alone. That's what happened on Family Feud that Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta. And that's why some moments transcend entertainment and become something else entirely. Something real, something necessary, something that reminds us all of our shared humanity. Steve Harvey learned it, Marcus Thompson lived it, and millions of people watching were changed by it. 5 words, 1 moment. Everything different after.